as though something has happened in the motorcade route. Something, I repeat, has happened in the motorcade route.
The President of the United States is dead.
Considering the number of enemies that he had, Lord knows they had reasons to get rid of him.
And I know that her face is down like this. She pushed him down and crawled out over the back to get a piece of skull off the back of the car.
Turned out that he left his tape recorder going when he left the room.
That bullet then traversed and moved backward. And then you do have the shot from the rear that struck him in the back, and I think there was another shot that hit him in the back of the head.
It didn't make any sense why one guy who suddenly went from having fired a rifle since the Marine Corps and suddenly was able to pull off world-class precision.
Was there a real thread of that fear running through the administration that perhaps a coup could take place?
He and Kenny O'Donnell were told they had to change their stories for the good of the country. He had to basically lie about what he saw.
Showtime. Welcome to the show, everybody. I'm Brent Holland. Settle in your most comfy chair tonight. Get the coffee going, get the tea going, or a beverage of choice. We got a great show for you tonight. Legendary JFK researcher and author David Lifton returns. Also joining us tonight is attorney Bill Blackwell. David Lifton, of course, is a graduate of the Cornell University School of Engineering Physics and worked on the Apollo space program. Yes, he worked on the Apollo space program. Absolutely. He is the author of a book that has inspired just about every researcher and follower of the JFK assassination conspiracy I've ever spoken with. And that book, of course, is the bestseller, Best Evidence, Disguise, and Deception in the Assassination of John F. Kennedy. Okay, David, let's jump in right away. I've received a zillion questions, a zillion Facebook posts, a zillion emails, a zillion phone calls on your new book that's entitled Final Charade. How close to release is it?
I don't know. I'm going as fast as I can. There's two parts to the book. Let's put it this way. One part of the book is, they're both really totally original and new. They have not really been discussed publicly, and so I'm always careful about what I say, okay? So let me start with the second part of the book, okay? I originally thought that there were going to be separate books, but I'm putting this into one book. First of all, I'm much further along in my age, and second of all, it's possible to say quite a bit in one book, and I'm not really concerned if the book doesn't explain 100%, because I can always supplement it with an auxiliary volume and stuff like that. Okay, second part of the book deals with Oswald, and you might call it the first time anybody's published a comprehensive picture of Oswald from the standpoint that he was innocent. This is really important to understand. My view, and I'll abbreviate my own name, I'll refer to myself in the third person by my initials, DSL, okay? David Samuel Lifton. I do not believe that Oswald fired any shots at Kennedy that day. Okay, he's not responsible for the assassination. He's used as the unwitting patsy, but he's not responsible for the murder of Kennedy. There's a whole theory and a whole bunch of data you have to understand to get inside his state of mind and what he thought he was doing that day. Because in March, before November 22nd, he did order a rifle. And there's no question that it was made to appear that that rifle was the murder weapon, but that's only because after the shooting, President Kennedy's body was covertly altered. And by that, I mean bullets were removed and they messed with the wounds on the body, removed bullets to make room by putting that bullet on a stretcher and 2 fragments in the front seat of the car, of the limo, that his rifle that he had ordered the previous March was the murder weapon. Now, the problem is that Oswald, his bio, he did a lot of things that were very unusual for a person at his time. For example, you don't just get out of the Marines and then go to the Soviet Union and live there for 2.5 years. That has to be understood. What the heck was he doing over there? Was he just a curiosity? He decided he wanted to go there and live for 2.5 years? 2 3/4 years? Yeah, it's possible. That's it. That's the innocent explanation. That's as innocent as you can get. But I don't think that's what's going on, because Oswald had a covert assignment. He was connected with the government. And so he, besides wanting to live in the Soviet Union and for 2.5 or whatever number of years, he was there 37 months, I think it was, he had an intelligence assignment pertaining to radar, which was his military specialty. But that's really not important in a way. You know, if we knew his assignment, I don't think it would make very much sense in terms of what happened in Dealey Plaza to, you know, a year and a quarter after he returned. He returns in June 1962 on a boat run by the Holland America line. And by that time, he's met Marina. She's on the boat with him. There's obviously people who want him to get back to the U.S. as soon as possible, ASAP, as they say, if you're sending a package. So they wanted him home. And if he had an assignment, that's the reason they really wanted him home, because they can't have the assassination of Kennedy without a pre-selected patsy. You just can't do it. Otherwise, think about what the wire service reports would look like. President Kennedy was shot. He's dead, and we don't know who did it. Or if we have a name for the guy, you absolutely have to have coordination between who this pre-selected patsy is and what he's doing on 11/22. I mean, if Oswald's not a controlled agent, and that's one way of saying it, if Oswald is not a pretend Marxist, and if he doesn't have a handler, let's say he was completely disconnected with the events, you can't have announcements on November 22nd within 30 minutes of the shooting that Oswald's the assassin if Oswald's got a 9-to-5 job in Toledo, Ohio. You know, so if he's part of a setup, he has to have a handler. I mean, otherwise you're leaving everything to coincidence, and that is absolutely not what happened. Everything was not left to coincidence. So there's the Oswald part of the puzzle. Now, I said that was part 2. Let me go back to part 1. Part 1 is the autopsy, the body of President Kennedy, which tells the truth about the shooting, simply because that's what the body is. It's the target of the assassins. And basically, if you get the target after the shots are fired, you can see how many shots hit the target. That means how many entries are on the body. And if there's ballistic evidence, bullets inside, you'd retrieve the bullets and send them to the FBI lab. And you'd want to compare those bullets with the rifle that was found in the building, or which Oswald ordered the previous March. There's another part, which I should really mention, which is that it was planned in advance to alter the president's body. What was supposed to happen was that he was, right after the shooting, within 30 seconds, 40 seconds, a couple of minutes at most, the limousine was going to go under the underpass, get off at a certain exit, use the service road, and Kennedy was to be transferred to an ambulance. Now, that's new. It'll be developed in Final Charade, the ambulance transfer. And we're not talking about the innocent ambulance driven by Aubrey Reich, who you will find on the Best Evidence video. I'm talking about another ambulance that plays a critical role. And if he was transferred to that ambulance, which was the plan, but did not happen, well, there's a magic trick you do. And the answer is you pretend he's alive when he's dead. And then you have every right to laugh and say, well, how do you do that? And the answer is, well, in the ambulance, you intubate him. What happens in a hospital when you're intubated? Well, first of all, they stick the breathing thing on your face, and then if you take that off, they put an endotracheal tube into your mouth to get air into your lungs. And of course, in the case of Dallas, that was done immediately by the first doctor that saw him. But then Dr. Perry, who was not involved in any of these magic tricks, removed the endotracheal tube and did what any physician would have done. He made a tracheotomy. Okay? So, and then he realized he's dead. Harry has the realization that he's done a tracheotomy on a corpse. Kennedy was already dead. He was very upset. Obviously, it's not his practice to do a tracheotomy on a corpse. And he washed his hands of it. And that was the end of it. Kennedy, Secret Service then had a problem. He was not pronounced. There had been no possibility of removing the bullets because they hadn't gone to surgery. So that's the situation in Dallas. Now, the question is, how are you going to pull off all this nonsense in Dallas? And the answer is that it was planned in advance to transfer Kennedy immediately after the shooting into an ambulance. And I have the evidence for that, which is too detailed to go into on the show, and I don't want to get into all the details of it, but that's basically the plan in advance, to treat Kennedy when he was dead as if he was still alive. And you do that by putting him in an ambulance and intubating him. That's basically part of the evidence that I have, that this is what the intention was for the plot. And I'm saying to you that the evidence is really good on this point of what was planned and which did not happen. It's as good as if you had handed me a manila folder and it was typed out. I mean, it's that good. And I spent quite a bit of time on this, so I know about this. That's the plan. The plan did not work. Now, one of the reasons the plan did not work, you might say, well, what do you mean it didn't work? Is that there was an extra victim in this affair. And the victim that was unexpectedly shot was Governor John Connelly. So the plans that were made could not be executed. I mean, I'll be very careful about this when I tell you, we're very clear about this, that if that car had pulled over anywhere and Kennedy was transferred to an ambulance, Nellie Connelly would say, what the hell are you doing? My husband's in my lap. Why are you taking this man whose brains have just been shot all over the back seat and putting him into this ambulance? What about me? What about John? Okay, so that's one of the keys to understanding what was supposed to happen but did not. And it concerns the ambulance transfer. The ambulance transfer never took place, but I have excellent evidence that it was supposed to take place. And there were some reporters who were actually briefed on this before the fact. There's one or two dirty, in the intelligence language, you say someone's dirty if they have foreknowledge. And there's no question that there were people with some foreknowledge and who accidentally talked about it. And it ended up in a public record that I have, that A, he was to be transferred to an ambulance, and B, he was to be intubated in the ambulance. So that's the essence of what had happened. Now, the idea that this was going to happen when Kennedy stepped off that plane, this ambulance to which he was going to be transferred actually ends up in the public record by accident, because there were certain radio transmissions that were made, and which I now have. And if we have those radio transmissions, you see the general outline again of what was supposed to happen but did not. And the whole thing is complicated by the fact that there's an extra victim. They had to deal with Connelly. They couldn't stop somewhere and transfer Kennedy to an ambulance because that's part of some subterfuge. Well, Mrs. Connelly, Mrs. Connelly knew Kennedy was dead. It was obvious. And I forget what her exact words were, that Kennedy because she saw the headshot, or she saw the results of the headshot with the blood and brains of Kennedy being spattered all over the rear seat. So she knew he was dead, and they couldn't stop to execute some subterfuge. They can't stop the car and say, yes, we know your husband's still alive, but we have a plot to attend to. So please let us do what we have to do. I mean, you can get into some pretty black humor scenes here. I mean, the fact is that the plot failed, and the plot failed as it was intended to unfold. It failed because one of the reasons was because Connelly was shot by accident. So once you have Connelly being shot by accident, when I say by accident, I mean unexpectedly. And we can get in that. Can't write about this without having a theory, and I don't want to get into that theory, in this show. But I can assure you that in the contingency planning that was made in connection with this murder, I guess nobody thought of the idea that events would go so haywire that the governor would be shot. First of all, there's a whole line of evidence that Connelly was not supposed to be in the car. Lyndon Johnson went to some lengths to get him out of the car. Here, John, come to this car, sit with me, blah, blah, blah. Or at least get Nellie out of the car, because, you've got some sharp shooting going on here, because you've got JFK and his wife, Jackie. You've got Nellie in that. And the idea is they're supposed to pick off JFK without injuring anybody else. Didn't work. Connelly got hit. And as a matter of fact, there's little question in my mind that Connelly was hit from the front, just the way JFK was hit from the front, in the neck and in the head, as evidenced by the back wound, the exit wound at the back of the head. The evidence that Connelly was hit from the front is right there in the record, and I've examined the documents. People haven't paid attention to such things as, what was Connelly's chest? What did it look like? Something was done to Connelly before he was released to go upstairs to surgery. And I'll tell you that the first doctor to see Connelly is not the way the record shows, because there's some other one or two doctors that were in there. And I've interviewed one of them, and I've got the records. And the way you can prove it is that Connelly was hit from the front by a bullet that caused his ribs to bend inward. And by the time Dr. Shaw got to the body, which, by the way, was not 1 or 2 or 3 or 5 or 10 minutes, the Shaw operation, which is called a thoracotomy, an exploratory operation on the chest. By the time Dr. Shaw does his thoracotomy, he makes note of the fact that 6 inches of Connelly's rib is missing. I mean, where'd it go? And when I used to give lectures on this, giving people a little peek at the evidence and what lie beneath the surface. And I used to say, where did this 4 to 5 or 6 inches of rib go to start a second story of mankind? I mean, that was the way I used to talk about it. You cannot suddenly have 6 inches of rib missing. And I have some great taped interviews with Dr. Shaw. Well, Dr. Shaw, where do you think the rib went? And Shires too, I think. Where do you think the rib went? Was it in the car? No. Do you think it was in his clothing? No. And I go through a whole checklist. The rib is gone because there was medical work done on Connelly before Dr. Shaw got to his operation, which was at 12:38, as I recall now. No, 1:38. In other words, Kennedy assassination's at 12:30. Car arrives at the hospital. There's all kinds of buzzing around the body and things going on between 1 and 1:15, 1:20. The anesthesia to Connelly is not administered until 1:12, as I recall. I'm relying on my memory, but I remember that number, 1:12. And the actual legitimate thoracotomy does not start until 1:37. How do you explain that? The guy comes in wounded, needs an operation. Nobody's looked at these times. Nobody's put this stuff on a timeline the way I have, and then matched it with certain radio transmissions I have. And then the whole story becomes very clear. And when you look at the Zabruta film, it becomes really clear. If Connelly was not in that car, it would have been much easier. If Mrs. Kennedy had not gone on the trip, but she, when she lost the baby, she insisted she wanted to make it was a really lovely story. She wanted to make Jack happy, go with him politically, blah, blah, blah. So she's on the trip. And the result of all this is that you have a much more complicated situation that could ever have been part of the planning. I think if you went to a normal assassination person who's paid a lot of money to be a good sharpshooter, he would find it very difficult to predict that he would have a high probability of success shooting into a car with the president, his wife, the governor, and his wife on jump seats, and that nothing would go wrong. You wouldn't want to do that. But I guess that who was ever behind this said the hell with it. They threw the dice, and that's the way they planned the shooting. They certainly didn't intend to shoot Governor Connelly. That's for damn sure. So, so that's part of the whole business of pulling a deception off at Parkland Hospital to pretend he's alive when he's dead to get him up to the OR. Okay, and I've got a lot of some very good evidence about that. So now that's the medical part of the case, or the autopsy part. It was however you want to view it. The other part of the case is Oswald. And that's a really interesting story because Oswald left the Marines on a date that's easy to remember. He checked out on 9/11 of 1959. And by October 16th, he's appearing in Moscow, at the American Embassy. And the whole question is, how did he get there so fast? I mean, there's a whole story about that. And you have to know about what Oswald was doing. And one of the things he wanted to do, and I believe this is true, he wanted to go to these historically important spots which deal with the founding of the Soviet Union, okay? And I am now talking about Lenin's trip from Helsinki, Finland, I think it was, and going on the railroad trip from Helsinki, if I've got this right, to Moscow. And he took that trip by rail. And, and then when you get to the Soviet Union in those days, you just couldn't get off, say, oh, I like my baggage and where's my Hertz rent-a-car? That's not the way it worked. They assigned you that woman, what's her name? I forget her name right now. But she was a very lovely woman and she spoke, fluent Russian. She was with the, the name escapes me right now, but she was with the Intours people. And so he had a guide all the time with him. And he had to explain to this guide, he gets off the train. Can you imagine? She says, "What would you like to go to the museum? You want to go to this museum, the such and such museum? You want to go here?" No. Well, what is it you want to do? He says, "I want to defect to the Soviet Union. I want to defect to the workers' paradise." The workers' paradise. And she actually believed him, and she helped him write the letter that goes to the Presidium, where Oswald lucked out again, because the first thing they wanted to do is, this guy's crazy. Like even the top guy, there's some great remark in the record that, how does he not know that our system doesn't work? That it costs too much to buy an orange or a banana. Listen, I know some of these stories where it was because my father was born in Russia, okay? And my father and his 4 brothers were born in Russia. And I was just reading the family history written by my eldest of the 5 brothers, who came over here in 1893, I think, and then the other 4 came over, and I've now got the file of those letters, which is very interesting because,
David, tell us about that. Was that to escape the pogroms? Yeah,
among other things, yes. Oh, yeah. And they had a horse, and they had this, and they had a vegetable garden, and they would, they eked out an existence that way. And yes, the pogroms were part of it, and I heard these stories when I was a young boy about the risk, to my father and his family, but they got out. But the first one to come over here was the eldest. He kind of paved the way and learned the ropes and all the rest of it. And he was my Uncle Ben. And I knew him very well, obviously. I mean, he's my uncle. First of all, I lived next door to him. When we moved to Rockaway Beach, New York, our next door neighbor there's the ocean to one side of the house. There was the beach and the ocean. And to the other side was Uncle Ben. And I used to talk to him. Now, all these people were very successful when they came over here, the 5 brothers. I mean, my father, Al, and he was the youngest of 5. And one year earlier was Irving. Al and Irving went into business, and they formed a company which is still in business today, because it was taken over by one of the cousins, which was fine. I mean, I did not want to go into the electrical supply business selling lighting fixtures, to wives and other people who had just bought houses. And the reason I could never do that was two things beckoned to me, which were both very exciting. First of all, I was part of the Apollo program, and I can assure you that selling lighting fixtures and all that, they're very nice people, but that didn't compare to going to the moon. That's number one. And second of all, I got involved with Professor Liebler over at UCLA, and I found this remarkable FBI report that said the president's body was altered prior to autopsy. So between those two things, I was hooked. And when Liebler sent the memorandum about my discovery to Chief Justice Warren, the week or two after I made the discovery, and we were buddies by that time, I mean, it was astounding what I had found, that an FBI report given to the commission, which they had in their files and which they didn't understand, said there had been surgery of the head area, namely in the top of the skull, prior to the official autopsy. I mean, and then the doctors can't find any bullets, and the actual FBI agents there in their report actually have two mentions of this, but one of them goes, they were at a loss to explain why they could find no bullets. I mean, the whole thing is ridiculous in a way. So anyway, my father and his four brothers came over here on a separate transport, a separate means of going over here. You had to prepare meals. Recently, one of my cousins gave me a file, and I was just reading it in the last few days. And you really get into it because we're dealing in a world where, you don't go from A to B in a car. You have a horse, And so the whole business of how they got the vegetables, my grandma on my father's side was a good cook, and she was lovely and very good-hearted, and they all loved her. She was an angel. I met her before she died, fortunately, so I had the chance to talk to her a little bit. So I don't know exactly where I was in the story, but I want you to know that these five boys came over here, and and they came over about 1910, I think, maybe 1913. I'm not sure, but it's amazing because you watch the movie, which I was watching last night. It just turns out I was watching Dr. Zhivago on TV, and there's the dramatization by Warren Beatty of the Bolshevik Revolution. I mean, it's very exciting, even to this day, to watch that. It's extraordinary filmmaking by with the International on the soundtrack, And my father and his brothers were not communists at all. They were merchants, and they each made their success. My Uncle Ben was in the clothing business, and another one was in real estate, and two brothers went into electrical supplies, and Morris was in plumbing supplies. But I mean, the thing is that when you go to the movie, to me, it was like the missing link to really understand what was going on in Russia. Watch Warren Beatty's film. It was just stunning.
It was called Reds, actually, that one. Dr. Zhivago was beforehand.
You're absolutely right, and I just made a mistake.
That's okay. That's fine. I do them all the time, too. Not to worry. I make mistakes
I was watching Reds. No, I was watching Reds, and the scenes were amazing in that. Now, I first saw that movie about whenever it was. I forget when it was released, 91. I saw that movie 10 years ago. The woman in my life at the time was basically, I mean, she wasn't a member of the Communist Party, but she was, for all practical purposes, a deeply read, person. And the reason she was that, because she was brought up in a home, because her father was the youngest member of the Abraham Lincoln Brigade. So they went to Spain to fight the fascists in 1937 or 8, whatever the year was. And it was really interesting because I'd never met, I mean, you read about stuff like this, but I'd never really met someone who was such a dyed-in-the-wool Marxist, So you have the 26 volumes in the story of Oswald, and it's all very abstract, right? I mean, you have testimony, Then I got to meet Marina. You probably know that, or you don't know it. And I did a really important filmed interview with her. And we, for a very modest sum of money, we released it on hard copy. So today it's on the internet. And you can see Marina, who's basically a white, what do you call it? A white, she's not a red, she's a
white Russian.
A white Russian, correct. And why she's a white Russian. And you really know this stuff, the whole texture of what happened with Oswald. He goes there, he defects, it's a phony defection. He wants to live in Minsk, he's curious as hell. he has literary ambitions. Maybe he'll someday write about it, blah, blah, blah. And then he meets Marina. And believe me, I mean, if you go back to your college years, to the first time you really met an extraordinarily sensual, sexy woman, that's what happened with Oswald. And I can tell you that based on the fact that I got to know Marina so well. And of course, that really made the whole thing come alive. I wasn't reading about it in a book. I mean, I knew the woman. She would call me up. The reason she would call me up as often as she did is that my book, Best Evidence, was published in '81. Now, she's technically inclined. She was trained as a pharmacist. And so she could follow the arguments. And I was on my book tour, and I was in Fort Worth. I think it was WFAA. I'm not sure or was it KRLD? It's one of the big stations. There were three of them. CBS, KRLD, and the FAA was the ABC. But anyway, I was handed a note at the end of my interview. There's a woman out in the lobby that wants to speak to you. So I went out in the lobby, and there was Marina, who up until that time, you must understand, said, yes, my husband did it. It's really important to understand that. And then a lot of people didn't like her because she said, hey, my husband had the rifle. He did this. He would practice with the rifle, da-da-da-da-da. Then out comes his book, Best Evidence, and says, all of this is false because the body was altered. She could understand that. So she wanted to meet me. So we met. And I said, everything you're saying is really important, but I'd like to get you on camera. So she agreed. And there was a wonderful filmmaker who, very, very talented, who does commercials basically for products. And his name was Michael Grasso. And he really made a beautiful impression on Marina and her husband, Ken. I forget his last name. Well, now she's Porter, Kenneth Porter. And she met him and they got married and they have a child of their own. But her two daughters are, the youngest one was Rachel and the oldest one was June. Rachel was about 4 or 5 weeks old. No, Rachel was born on October 18th, 1963. So she was 6 weeks old, or about approximately, but at the time of the assassination. Now, after Marina's interview with me was aired, Rachel, either she called me up or I called her, and she was absolutely interested in doing the interview. And I said, we really have to do an interview and make this part of the record. What bothered me is that if I didn't do it fast, A, B, C, D, E, F, G, different researchers would be calling her up. And God knows, once you do the interview, and this is a broadcaster, can you imagine, it's like eating a meal which is already, chewed on. I would like to get her and be the first. So Rachel said yes. And we met in Austin, Texas. She's a really interesting person. I think she's now married to a doctor and she has 1 or 2 children. I'm not sure. But she was very interesting because she was so energetic, she's the kind of person who would much prefer to be a waitress, earning her money on tips and running around from one table to another, than sitting in an office doing some kind of office work. She was very, very energetic. And now, where was I in the story? So she.
You were talking about the 3 kids, and you'd met Marina, and you interviewed her. You were the first one to interview her.
That's right. And then Rachel. And then in the interview with Rachel, and I've never really aired this stuff. I think we maybe aired a little bit of it on hard copy when she was on hard copy, but that's not representative of the whole interview. I mean, when Rachel saw the evidence that her father was probably set up, and when she understood that evidence, and she realized that what was in Best Evidence was truthful and to be relied upon rather than this whole crazy case against Oswald, which is based on a false autopsy because Kennedy's body was altered, okay? And that's resulted in a false diagram of the shooting and everything. That's what I like to say about it. She starts to cry. I mean, she was really upset, and it was very touching because I gave her the evidence on which she could take to the bank, and she knew with absolute certainty that her dad did not kill President Kennedy. Then we held a party for her, And I could start naming people, it doesn't matter, but we held a party for her in Hollywood, and we had about 20 people there, including some reporters. It was really quite lovely. And I know her life changed after that. Now, of course, one of the problems in this area is there's an envy and competition. And as soon as it got out that I had done this, you know, people who were, this is in the Kennedy movement, there's a lot of cattiness. And, you know, Rachel started getting approached with all these crazy stories. And one of the crazy stories was that we had some beautiful still photographs of her, and one of them appeared in a Spanish magazine. And I forget the name of the magazine, but it was one of the big ones published in Madrid. And, you know, somebody had this crazy idea, and he's spreading this rumor that I got paid a huge amount of money for the publication of this one picture, which was ridiculous. And she got angry. I mean, in other words, the proverbial they, painted a false picture of me, and it, for all practical purposes, was not that incident. It was another incident, and I don't want to name names, especially since if they're alive, I don't want to get in an argument with them, and if they're dead, I don't want to, you know, insult the dead. But I had to deal with this kind of thing. Anyway, I wish her well. Marina, when I was on my book tour, I don't think she ever lost faith in me, because especially, not only did I have the answer, and she was the one who knew her husband, obviously, I convinced her that he was involved in what's called role playing. And he was playing this role of the assassin. So if you got some guy with a theatrical streak, and if he had gone to college, you can bet that he would have majored in, among other things, drama. He loved it. He loved method acting. And that's why I think when he was pitched this ridiculous assignment on November 22, 1963, he was not going to shoot anybody. I'm almost certain that he was firing blanks, first of all. And I have reasons for believing that. But
so just to clarify, David, just for a second, you believe he was in the 6th floor depository, in this quote-unquote sniper's nest, is that correct?
I believe he was. No, let me be very specific about this.
Sure.
I believe that somebody poked something out of that window, and you have a division of labor here. If they had Oswald sufficiently, not hypnotized, but sufficiently to buy into this idea that he's a secret agent with an assignment, you know, to fake an assassination, all that, could he have been the person who was sticking that thing out of the window? Yes, he could have. But then you'd have to say about Howard Brennan, the famous eyewitness. Brennan made a correct identification. On the other hand, if Oswald was upstairs and the handler said, "Look, you know, you're too nervous about this, or you're too giggly about it, or whatever, here, we'll do it. But then you have to get the hell out of here, because we want to meet you down in the lunchroom afterwards." Because the setup of Oswald, that he was to die within a minute or two of the assassination, to me is very clear. I mean, he's downstairs. I have reason to believe, by the way, which I'll put into Final Charade. But I believe I understand where Oswald was at the time of the shooting, and I don't want to get into it in too much, but I know where he was, and then he ran from where he was, which was to the west side of the building. He ran in the back entrance and then upstairs one flight to the lunchroom. So the idea that he was upstairs on the 6th floor is not mandatory for my belief, because they're going to alter the body anyway. The question is, who poked the gun out of the window? Well, I don't know. But could it be Oswald? Yes. For many years, I believed he was so mind screwed. There's a more way of saying it. But anyway, he was so credulous and believed his assignment. Could he have done it? Yes. Do I think he was at the window with the rifle? No. Because I think they got somebody to stick something out of the window. And I just don't trust Howard Brennan's testimony for all the reasons that have been discussed in books on the assassination. So anyway, he ends up on the 2nd floor, as you know. And his first thing that happens, as soon as the shots are fired, this police officer in the motorcade pulls over his motorcycle, and he runs up the front entrance, and he says to Roy Truly, "Take me upstairs." You know, he wants to go upstairs.
Marion, I forget his last name, forgive me, the police
Marion
officer.
Baker.
Thank
Marion
you.
Baker.
Thank you.
So Baker is following, Baker says, follow me. No, excuse me. Truly says, follow me. I'll take you upstairs. Between the third and fourth floor, second and third floor, Truly realizes that Baker is not following him. So he goes down one flight to the second floor, and he inches over and he sees inside the lunchroom that Baker is in there with his gun pointed at Oswald's stomach, and Oswald's just gotten a Coke out of the machine. And I don't want to, screw this up. Either he was about to put the nickel in or whatever it is in the machine, or he had gotten the Coke and was holding it. It doesn't matter. It's, 1, 6 of one, half a dozen. So Truly walks into the lunchroom and says, he sees the fact that his employee, who had been a Marine, and, he was supposedly pitched to him for the job on October 16th by Ruth Payne, who called up and said, we got a guy who, had been in the Marines, who was in the service, his wife's expecting a baby, to have a job opening, blah, blah, blah. So he Truly immediately pipes up and says, he works here. And so Baker has to reholster his gun, okay? And by the way, Oswald must have had a tremendous amount of confidence or something in his psyche. Can you imagine having a gun thrown in your belly and what the heck is going on here? But anyway, so where was I in the story?
In the second floor lunchroom. Yeah, Oswald just got a coat, and Marion Baker had a gun.
Right. So now he gets out of there, and he wants to get the hell out of the area, which is what he does. He gets out of the building, and then there's the question of how he leaves Dealey Plaza. Okay, well, what happened is, I don't know where he was in the building, where he was sitting at in the cafeteria, but what happened is a station wagon pulls around, and the first time this was developed in detail was in Josiah Thompson's 6 Seconds in Dallas years ago, and I'm sure he's going to republish part of this, and I hope he does, because it's a great story. But I mean, Oswald lets out a huge whistle, so there's some premeditation. The station wagon guy, sees him, pulls the station wagon over, and Oswald hops in and is driven by a dark-skinned man. We don't know whether that means Mexican, Cuban. I mean, and I don't want to be, be accused of any kind of racial thing. Maybe it's a white guy who'd gone to the beach and had a good suntan. But whatever it was, they race away in the station wagon. Now, the way the commission handled this, and I think they really screwed it up royally. Now the question is, where was Oswald? He's in the station wagon, if you believe that report. And there's a couple of documents, because there was a Nash Rambler. There were other documents that saw the station wagon incident, and I forget the guy's name, but he almost bumped into the station wagon because the guy had to put on the brakes to pull over. So we have good evidence of that, getting into the station wagon. But other witnesses said he got on a bus going west on Elm Street. Now, what I don't understand, because, I'm smart, but I'm not a genius, okay? So back in 19, whatever it was, when I got my set of the 26 volumes, I had to get a sense of this. So I had to get a good map. So I went to the AAA. I mean, this is not exactly rocket science, right? So I went to the AAA. Well, maybe I sent for it for $1. I don't remember. I got a nice map of Dallas. And I look at it and I say, hey, look at this. When you go under the underpass and you turn right and you're on Continental, you can get off Continental at Murphy Street and go down, and you can be at the bus station. In other words, it was absolutely possible for Oswald to get into the station wagon and then go over to Murphy Street, exit the station wagon, and go to the bus. Now, we know he got on the bus. How do we know that? Because he's knocking furiously on the bus door, and I forget the bus driver's name. Do you remember his name? This is what happens when you get older. But anyway, the bus driver's name, anyway, it can be found. So he puts his nickel in the thing, he sits down, and on the bus is the lady who rented him the rooming house when he first arrived in Dallas, Mary Bledsoe. And so, we have her statement. So we know he was on the bus, and then after a little while, he exits the bus. And now what's significant about this is that he didn't want to stay on that bus. And I think his instincts were good, because if you look at a series of FBI reports that the commission has, which I found these in some file, as soon as he leaves the bus, within a couple of minutes, a whole bunch of Dallas police, or people in Dallas police uniforms, are on the bus and taking names and checking to see if one of them had a gun, blah, blah, blah. So it's clear. And by the way, the fact that someone's in a Dallas police uniform does not mean they're a Dallas Police Department. Not that day. It was like Abraham Zapruder said, the police, they were running behind me. Yeah, sure. There were no police except one guy, Officer Haygood. The idea that there were a dozen police that were running behind Zapruder is ridiculous. There were not, if there were such people, and I don't doubt his testimony, they were not Dallas police, because they also got on a train. And that was parked there, and then the train pulls away. So that's the exit modus, the exit operandi to getting out of there, was these guys got on a train, and the train pulled away. And the train was kind of interesting because it was observed from an upper floor of the depository, and I have that data, either in FBI reports or depositions. And these people on the 5th floor of the Texas School Book Depository, looking down, saw men with rifles on the roof of one of the trains. That ain't the Dallas police, let me assure you. And if it is, he should have filed a police report. So there was stuff going on with trains. The trains were involved in this thing in terms of getting some people out of there. Now, where they went, I don't know. I mean, we used to joke around among those of us who were researching on this case that they had to be paid. The assassins have to be paid. So sure, take this train and we'll, 2 miles up this track and we'll pay you. That's not what I think happened. I think that the reason people were on the roof of the train, and this is my own personal belief, is because, and I know this sounds bizarre, but I'm just going to tell you what it is, because the people that organized this thing, they come from Allen Dulles' generation, World War II and all that stuff. And I really believe that the model they were following when they asked the assassins to get on the train for the same damned idea that was used on the Jews and those things, get on the train, we're taking you to such and such location and you'll be safe. Of course, they gassed them on the train, right? I mean, that's what happened. And there were the trains that were going to the concentration camps. So that's what I think is going on. The shooters dressed as police. There were men on the roof of the train for a reason. I wouldn't be surprised if they dropped gas canisters into the train, and the train pulls away, and that's the last we know. Now, there's one other aspect to the train story that's very important, and that is that years ago, somebody who I was very close to but has since passed away was named Fred Newcomb. And Fred Newcomb, for a while we were very close, but the main point is he made a discovery. And he found something that was very important, and I'll never forget the phone call. He calls me up and he says, David, do you have Life magazine for January 1967 in front of you? That has just been published with Connelly's story in it. Why President Kennedy went to Texas, and he's holding his cowboy hat, He says, I want you to open this thing up. And inside were all these color photographs of the Bond slides, as I recall. And there was the Willis slide was also there, but he says, I want you to turn to page such and such. And I said, he says, you see the windows on the little circular monument, the semicircular monument on the Grassy Knoll. Remember that with the concrete white alabaster monument? And he says, now look at this other page over here. And he pointed out that the Bond slides showed a train, and the Willis slide showed no train. So we call that the train no train conflict, among the many conflicts in the Warren Commission records. And Fred and I both gave a lecture on this at Long Beach State. I remember that. And we had 2 screens with 2 projectors. And there was really a gasp in the audience. There was a train and these pictures on one side, and there was no train on the other side. I don't know that I had the stuff of people on the roof of the train at that time. We had the pictures showing train, no train. But I don't know that we had fully developed, and certainly I don't remember fully developing the idea of gas canisters and all that. But that's what I believe happened. Because if police run on board a train, what are people doing on the roof of the train? It's right out of Schindler's List, with the business of the way they murdered the Jews. And I think that's the mentality of the people that designed this thing. They had to get rid of the shooters, And they were dressed as police, most of them. And it makes sense that they're dressed as police. It has the taint of being local authority. And then they run away. Zapruder says, the police were running behind me. There's a great interview with Zapruder. I have to tell you about this interview. That is not in the record. Now, I have an audio of it, but there was a very, very beautiful Berkeley undergraduate. And I'm pretty sure I know her name. And it doesn't matter to me now, because I suppose she's still around and she'd be much older, maybe 40 or 50 years older. But she was really quite beautiful and lovely. Her name was Barbara Bridges. So Barbara goes down with another fellow, and I forget his name. He published a couple of things under the auspices of Grassy Knoll Press, and he was one of the original 1965 researchers, right when the Warren Report came out. And Barbara interviews Zapruder. And, she's a nice woman from Berkeley, very lovely looking. And she has the whole thing on tape, and I got a copy of this tape. And she says, well, Mr. Zapruder, the police that were running behind you, they were police from the motorcade? And Zapruder goes, well, where else would they be from? I mean, that should have been part of one of the investigations. And I don't remember why it was not. But it's a great tape. And I think it gives away basically the MO. The assassins were dressed as police. They ran away. They got onto a train. Train pulls away. Train has been removed from the photographs given to the Warren Commission, which are the Willis slides, but is in the photographs that were not given to the Warren Commission, which are the Bond slides. So we used to give lectures, Willis versus Bond, and that's great. But I mean, I really think it gives away the kind of disguise that was used. Somebody dressed some people up as police. They were the assassins. If they weren't the assassins, and I think they were the security perimeter. The assassins just can't come up DEALEY PLAZA and say, oh, yeah, this is a good position. I think I'll shoot the president from behind this tree or behind this fence. You have to have a security corridor, Somebody has to play the security role, because otherwise the assassins are going to miss. They're going to be very nervous, saying, hey, Jose, is it okay to shoot now? They have to have a security perimeter. And the police that Zapruder saw running behind him were that patrol.
Listen, I want to thank you both so much.
Absolutely.
Merry Christmas, Happy Hanukkah, and Assalamu Alaikum. And got all three in there, I think. So I think we're good. Listen, everybody watching, have a pleasant, happy holiday, and stay safe. And we'll talk to you soon. I'm Brent Holland from the Brent Holland Show.
Thank you, Brent.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you very much, Brent. Thank you.
Thank you.
It appears as though something has happened in the motorcade route. Something, I repeat, has happened in the motorcade route.
The President of the United States is dead.
Considering the number of enemies that he had, Lord knows they had reasons to get rid of him.
And I know that her face is down like this. She pushed him down and crawled out over the back to get a piece of skull off the back of the car.
Turns out that he left his tape recorder going when he left the room.
That bullet then traversed and moved backward. And then you do have the shot from the rear that struck him in the back, and I think there was another shot that hit him in the back of the head.
It didn't make any sense why one guy who suddenly went from having fired a rifle since the Marine Corps and suddenly was able to pull off world-class precision.
Was there a real thread of that fear running through the administration that perhaps a coup could take place?
He and Kenny O'Donnell were told they had to change their stories for the good of the country. He had to basically lie about what he saw.